Welcome to the Making of Madrid, a podcast that's all about Madrid, presented by me, Felicity Hughes. I'm a tour guide and writer. Today's episode is going to be all about the Royal Armoury. It's an incredible museum that people often skip over after they've been to the palace and don't allot enough time to see this incredible display of military might and financial clout of Carlos V, Holy Roman Emperor, known as Charles I of Spain. So he was the most powerful man in the world of his time, and he ruled over extensive lands in Europe, northern Italy, Burgundian Low Countries, Spain, Sicily, Naples, Sardinia, but also he oversaw the colonization of South America. And he started this collection of armour, which is just so historically rich and interesting. And I'm going to give you a few highlights of the collection that touch on the Habsburg family's big dramas. So we're going to talk about a marriage that tied Spain to England, the black legend of a murderous son, and a huge naval battle that involved Cervantes himself. Before I get stuck into the episode, I'd just like to say that the Making of Madrid is a passion project of mine, but I rely on the support of listeners to help me keep that going. And if you are enjoying the podcast, please like and subscribe, put a review in. That all helps. But what really also helps is perhaps you could buy a copy of my guide to the quiet side of Madrid called Quiet Madrid on my website, The Making of Madrid, or you can buy an audio tour, or you could just leave a tip if you fancy. Anyway, let's get stuck into this episode. So why am I talking about the Royal Armoury today? Well, I'm actually recording this way ahead of time when I'm stuck in the thick of research for the Lonely Planet Guide. And I was invited to go and see the reopening of the Armoury, which had been closed for over a year. And the Armoury was great in the past. There hasn't been any big changes in the collection. I will cover the couple of big changes there have been, but it was always a very dim, poorly lit space. So what they've done now is installed this incredible overhead lighting that doesn't give too much glare, but lights up all the beautiful little details you can see in the armour, and it's really quite something. So after they presented this new lighting, I had the pleasure of being guided around by Álvaro Soler, who is the curator of the Royal Armoury and also the Armoury collection in the Galería de Colecciones Reales, which stands just by the Royal Armoury. So the Royal Armoury is what you see when you leave the palace, and if you are visiting the palace, I advise you to give yourself at least 45 minutes to have a good look at this collection. And big plus on this is that most people are quite tired by this point and skip over it. So you will have lots of space and peace and quiet to go and enjoy this really, really fantastic collection. The first thing you'll see when you get in are the oldest pieces. So one of the things you should look out for is the Nazari dagger that belonged to Boabdil, who was the last emir of Granada. And you can also see the medieval armour of Ferdinand of Aragon. And these two things are connected because it was, of course, Ferdinand of Aragon who made up the other half of what we call the Reyes Católicos, the Catholic monarchs, who essentially united Spain by carrying out what's called the Reconquista, where they invaded the remaining Muslim territories of Spain and ruled over a lot of the Iberian Peninsula. So you can see Ferdinand's medieval armour, spike gauntlets and all, and this trophy that he took from Boabdil, which is just a gorgeous Nazari dagger, which has this lovely ivory handle with floral patterns on it. It's really a work of art. The thing is I'm not really that into military history that much, but the fact that all this armour is just so gorgeous and beautifully decorated means that even if you're not into military history, you can enjoy the collection because all this stuff is really works of art in itself, even though, of course, the purpose of them is for violence. So yeah, we've got this collection going all the way back to Ferdinand of Aragon, who was, of course, married to Isabel I, the Catholic monarchs, and their daughter was Juana, and she became Queen of Castile, and she was married off to Philip the Handsome. And here is where the Habsburgs enter, because Philip the Handsome was ruler of the Habsburg Netherlands. And it's his son that really is the beginning of this incredible collection, because he was Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles I of Spain. He had huge dominions, as I mentioned in the introduction. The most powerful man in the world of his time, vast fortune. And if you go and visit the Prado, you can see his portrait by Titian, and he's wearing a suit of armour prior to the Battle of Mulberg. This actual bit of kit is in the Galeria de Colecciones, which is right next to the armory in the palace. But that's just a little highlight because the majority of his armour, is in the armory. And that includes, by the way, a really, really cute little suit of armour he had made for his dog, because his dog would go into battle with him as well. When I went to the presentation, Álvaro Soler explained that for Charles, art was important, so he commissioned works by great artists like Titian. But for him, what was really important was the armour collection. So he spent a fortune on this stuff, and a lot of it was made by the Helmschmied family, who went on to make armour for all his descendants. And yeah, with the new lighting, you can just see it picks out all these beautiful details, like the hunting armour has got lovely animals all over it. Just gorgeous designs. It's really something to see. And some of it is mounted on kind of human figures astride a horse. So you can see how it would have looked in battle. And it's really, really impressive. So Carlos's son was Philip II. Now, he's really important to Madrid because this is the king who came and established the court in Madrid, effectively making this city his capital. And Felipe II is actually the one who was a real art lover. He didn't go into battle as much as his father, even though he inherited this vast kingdom and was also one of the most powerful men in the world. If you go to El Escorial, you can see his hall of battles, where he had all the different battles that he won, painted in a wonderful mural on the corridor that's near his bedroom in El Escorial. It's really quite something to see. Philip actually liked art a lot as well, though. So he's the one who really founded the Prado collection, because he collected works by Hieronymus Bosch and other big artists. So he was really starting to amass this stuff. But of course, he also had armour made for him by the Helmschmidt family. And one of the lovely things about the armoury is they have reproductions of the paintings of these kings in the armour, and the armour right beside them. So there's tons of armour that Philip II owned. And it puts us closer to this figure because, of course, cloth doesn't really stand the test of time, but armour does. So we can almost sort of imagine that we're standing in front of Philip himself. So one of the interesting things about Philip is he was married quite a few times. He was married 4 times. And his second marriage was to Mary Tudor. So this created an alliance with the English. And they were married in Winchester Cathedral in 1554. For this wedding, he had a suit of armour made. However, this wasn't what he ended up wearing. In the end, he wore a matching brocade outfit of white cloth of gold, with a matching cloak, with gold trim and velvet to match up with Mary. They were very much dressed in the French style. I guess this was some kind of middle ground for them. And Mary gave him some gifts of English style dress. She was rather keen on her husband, who was quite a bit younger than her. And apparently the wedding night was quite active. But Philip had to go back to rule over his kingdoms, and Mary died after. We think perhaps she died of cancer. And then, of course, who came to the throne after that was Elizabeth, and those two were at loggerheads, which all led to this failed Spanish Armada and, the end of this union between Spain and England. Now, I said that Philip got married 4 times. The first marriage that he had was actually to another Mary, but a Maria Manuela, who was actually his cousin. So I've got a whole post about the Habsburgs and interbreeding. This is infamous for leading to the Habsburg duel, which in fact actually did start with Charles V, or Charles I's fame. But yes, Felipe married his cousin, and his first heir was Carlos, Prince of Asturias. Now, he was a victim of this interbreeding because he was born with one leg longer than the other, an uneven temper, massive Habsburg jaw. He wasn't much of a looker. But of course, he was a prince, and he received armour when he was 13 for his 13th birthday. It was specially adapted to fit his body. By the way, Carlos, the originator of this collection, actually had arthritis, so his armour was specially adapted later on in his life to help him kind of move around. His armour's terribly heavy. Anyway, back to Don Carlos, because Don Carlos is actually the start of what we call the Black Legend. He horrified the court with fits of rage, and this behaviour convinced Felipe II that he was not fit to rule, and he was barred from succession. Then Carlos began to conspire with his Protestant enemies in the Low Countries, and even attempted to stab Felipe's right-hand man, who's the Duke of Alba. And if you're interested in the Duke of Alba, I highly suggest you go and visit the Palacio de Liria, because this Duke became so rich that he managed to start a collection of art that perhaps didn't rival Felipe II, but was really pretty splendid. And you can go and see that if you visit the Palacio de Liria. Anyway, this guy was called the Iron Duke, so you didn't want to mess with him. Things came to a head after Carlos tried to shoot his uncle, Juan of Austria. But a servant had actually emptied Carlos's guns beforehand. Why this guy was even handed a gun is incredible. Felipe then locked the dangerous Don Carlos away, and he died on July 24, 1568. And the rumours went flying, of course, from the Protestants that the king had ordered the assassination of his son. So you can see his suits of armour, and you can see a portrait of this dastardly prince dressed in fur trim. So that's all the stuff that you can see upstairs in the armoury. If you go downstairs, you can see loads of weapons, crossbows, rifles, even armour for children. And you can see some really interesting pieces of foreign armour. Now, one of the ones that always really excites everyone is a 16th century helmet of a samurai. So this is called a kabuto, and it looks a bit weird. It has metal ears stuck on the side. And this was a gift that was given by the Tensho embassy to King Philip II in 1584. Now that means that predates the era of Sakoku, which in Japan means that Japan became closed off to the external world. So this is one of the last sort of diplomatic exchanges between Spain and Japan. And a very rare old Spanish helmet. Unfortunately, there was a fire in the armoury in 1884, and this helmet was very badly damaged. But the people who made Assassin's Creed were really, really interested in this helmet, and they asked to scan it in exchange for making a recreation of it that they could use in their game, which is Assassin's Creed Shadows. So you can see that kabuto. Sometimes I think it's at the time of talking, this was actually, the reconstruction was in the armory and the original was in the Galería de Colecciones, but hopefully if you visit, you can see them both there. I do always say, try and get a ticket for the Galería de Colecciones, which you can have as sort of a joint ticket with the palace, because there's so much interesting artwork and historical background that you sort of miss out on if you just restrict yourself to the palace. But unfortunately, it'll take you about a whole day to get through all this, so I understand why people just restrict themselves to the palace. Now, anyway, I, of course, have a personal reason for being excited about this, because I lived in Japan for many years, and I recently went back and worked on the update of the Lonely Planet Guide to Kyoto and Kansai. So this is, I was really nerding out on all this because I'd been given the opportunity to brush up on my Japanese history recently. So I was excited to see that. More exciting things downstairs in the armory, so don't miss the downstairs because it's as big as the upstairs. You might get a bit of museum fatigue at this point. You can see the helmet and gauntlets of Ali Baha. Now, he was the commander of the Turkish fleet, and there's also a shield and banners from the Turkish fleet there along with that. So this was a big trophy from the Battle of Lepanto. Now, the Battle of Lepanto was a key battle that took place in 1571. So the Ottoman Turks were getting a bit above themselves, thought the Pope, and he asked Catholic countries to sort of join together to push them out. And the Spanish naval force were very much to the fore of this battle, and they were led by the son of Carlos V, Carlos I of Spain, and all his many titles. His son, who was born out of wedlock, after Carlos was widowed, and this guy's name was Don Juan de Austria. And he wasn't a bastard so much because he was recognized by his father and managed to become commander of the Spanish fleet under Felipe II. So Felipe II trusted his half-brother enough to be a commander, and he was obviously capable, because this was a great victory for the Spanish fleet. They managed to push back the Ottoman Turks, so there would be no more incursions into Europe. There's an interesting connection here with Cervantes, because Cervantes had turned up in Italy around this time, and he signed up to fight with the Spanish fleet. He was actually in quite a lot of hot water, because it's thought he had been caught for brawling in the street, getting involved in a duel, which was totally banned at the time, but happened all the time. And he'd really badly injured his opponent, and he was to have had his right hand cut off. In fact, he took part in this battle and was very ill at the time, but insisted on going up above deck and ended up being shot at. And the upshot was that he lost the use of his left arm. So in a way, some kind of poetic justice was served. But I guess we're all really glad that he kept his right arm, because that was his writing hand, and he went on to write Don Quixote in his old age. So that's a little interesting Cervantes link to the collection. So you can see the helmet and gauntlets of Ali Baja. Don't miss that one. And the last thing I wanted to point out, which Álvaro Soler was really, really excited to show, was Madrid's world-famous arquebuses. So an arquebus is a kind of long matchlock rifle used mainly for hunting. And I didn't know this, but the iron bullets made in Madrid were apparently very well known, renowned around the world for their robustness. They used a special way to work the metal, which meant that the bullets could take more gunpowder and stayed intact under pressure longer. The design of the rifles, because these were actually made during the time of Carlos III, now we're getting into the Bourbons. So beforehand, there was no Bourbon armory on display, but they've since now taken this stuff out of storage and put it here, because the rifles are works of art. They're inspired by French designs, but they were all manufactured in Madrid. And Madrid became really, really famous for its gorgeous arquebuses. However, all this came to an end when the French troops looted the Royal Armoury and took 400 weapons from there. And just smashed everything up, because they really didn't want the Spanish, who were fighting with them in the War of Independence, to get hold of these weapons that were really, really powerful. But there's a collection of around 83 shotguns and 14 pistols now on display. So that's really something worth seeing in the armory, and that's one of the new things that's on display right now. And that pretty much brings me to the end of this episode. I decided to do this one just because I was so excited by the collection after seeing it, and I just went straight away and hit record, because I thought there were a lot of interesting stories connected with the Royal Armoury. If you're enjoying the show, please drop me a line. And if you have anything you'd like me to cover in future, please do tell me, because I'll be open to suggestions fairly soon, and thinking about the rest of the content of this season. As ever, I do rely on your support, so please do leave a review. Go to themakingofmadrid.com, subscribe to my newsletter, maybe buy a copy of Quiet Madrid. That really helps, and it's a great way to experience the city away from the tourist crowds. Madrid is unfortunately suffering a little bit from over-tourism, but there are these little places like the Armoury where you can go and escape. You could also buy one of my Voicemap tours, or you could just leave me a tip. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.